Hello, welcome to Coffee and Conversations. I'm here with Opher from the Israel Aerospace Industries. Opher,
Hello, Corinne.
Pleasure
Nice
to meet you today.
Pleasure to meet you.
Thank you for making the time.
Thank you for having me.
Before we get into the very exciting things that you're doing at the moment, do you mind giving me a quick background on what you're doing at IAI?
So IAI is Israel's largest aerospace industry. We're about 15,000 employees, do about $4 billion in annual sales. 80% of it is for export. We deal in military and civil aerospace technology, so everything from space through unmanned air vehicles. We are a business, and we deal in a purely business fashion, but our owner is the government of Israel.
Right. As we're at the space conference right now, I believe you told me that you're launching for the moon soon, is that right?
We're launching to the moon in a week.
In a week?
And it is by far the most exciting thing that is on our book right now. About 8-10 years ago, three young engineers were sitting in a bar having too many beers and heard about the Google Lunar X Prize, which wanted to encourage non-government missions to the moon and set a $20 million prize for whoever would reach the moon, land, send back videos, and move 500 meters over the surface of the moon. And they said, after too many beers, we can do that. Well, to make a long story short, it cost about $100 million, which is by far the cheapest anyone's ever gone to the moon. Morris put up about $40 million of his own money. About 2 years or a year or two into it, they realized they couldn't do it alone, so they came to IAI and said, guys, can you build a spacecraft together with us? And we did. So we set up a joint team where they're doing some of the engineering work and we're doing a lot of the engineering work and building the spacecraft. It's called SpaceIL, and it's a non-profit startup. And the idea they had was, let's encourage Israeli kids to study higher education by showing them that everything is possible. And if a little country like us can get to the moon, a little kid can do anything he wants to. But presuming we succeed, we'll be the fourth country on the moon, the first time it's not a superpower, and the first non-government venture on the moon, and the smallest spacecraft ever to get to the moon. It's really a paradigm change in how one does space and how one goes to the moon.
How long did the whole timeline take from the Lunar X to the beers to the...
About 8 years. The actual work on the spacecraft, full scale, once everything was in place, took about 4 years. Even there were budgeting problems, and they had to raise the funds for it. So quite a few more billionaires stepped in. We even stopped a bit in the middle. But basically about 4 years to build and 8 years of end-to-end.
Can you also tell me a bit more what you're doing at IAI, other than sending payloads to the moon?
Well, our core business is observation satellites, what one would quietly call spy satellites. And we have observation satellites that are very high quality, so amazing pictures, very lightweight, very fast to maneuver, and they provide intelligence over our entire region. And as you well know, our region is quite challenging, so it's good to know what's happening in the neighborhood. We also do radar satellites. Radar satellites give pictures of the ground that look a little bit different than what we're used to seeing from optics, but they enable one to see in the dark and enable one to see through the clouds.
Mm-hmm. That's really great. It's definitely the private sector coming in, offering a service, or say moves you away from the whole old space model, which was always government-operated satellites only for government purposes, or then renting them out to the private sector. Can you tell me what you think of this whole old space versus new space? Is it innovative? Is it blocking? What are your thoughts?
Well, we've been there forever. We created ImageSat 20-something years ago. New space is interesting. New space is a financing model. New space is management model. New space is taking more risks. So we are working closely with some new space companies, and we've figured out a model of how to cooperate with new space companies. SpaceIL is an excellent example. SpaceIL is new space. Mm-hmm. Admittedly, not a for-profit organization, a non-profit organization. But the interesting thing is, SpaceIL also figured out together with us the business model of how a startup works with established space, which most of the others didn't manage to do. They tried to do it themselves. Now, you cannot build a spacecraft that goes to the moon in your garage. Engineering happened in both places and had to be synchronized. So we had the engineers in SpaceIL doing parts of the program and overall engineering control, because they wanted overall control of the program. And we, the big guys, were their contractor. Big company, program manager, and system engineers, they like doing it their way. And now the young kids are telling them how to do things. Not trivial. Not trivial for the young kids to tell the old guys, not trivial for the old guys to hear it from the young kids. We found a model that makes it work. And we're launching in a week, so it must work reasonably well. We're doing the same thing now with another company that wants to provide in-orbit servicing to spacecraft. So the story is this. When you put up a communication satellite, it's about 36,000 kilometers away from Earth, and it provides communications, and it has fuel for about 15 years. And after 15 years, you have to replace the satellite. So a few years before the satellite's finished, you contract someone to build a satellite for you and to launch it, and that's a few $100 million. It's a lot of money. And if you don't do it in time, you lose your spacecraft and you lose the position in space because someone else takes it, and you lose your customers. So you really have to get there a bit earlier just in case things are late. That happens everywhere. And so this new space company called Effective Space Solutions said, let's design a small spacecraft that will provide in-orbit servicing. It'll come up to the large satellite. It'll connect to it just before it's finished its fuel, and we'll provide propulsion for it. We'll be a tow truck for satellites, and we'll keep it in position for a few more years, for as long as the operator wants to keep it there. We'll extend the life. It's a life extension satellite. And from a business point of view, the owner of the satellite operator, suddenly can decide, instead of having a capital expenditure of hundreds of millions of dollars, to have an operating expenditure to buy a service for double digits, 15, $20 million, to service a satellite, which the CFO makes a lot of sense.
It does make a lot of sense.
He's suddenly a very happy guy. He can put $300 million off for 3-4 years and spend $15, $20 million now. That's, if his business is okay, if the satellite is still doing a good job, if it's giving good service and he can get revenues from it, it's fantastic. And so we've teamed up, and the same way again. They're in charge overall. We're doing most of the engineering work. They're doing some of the design. So same methodology that we developed working with Space.il is now working with Effective Space. With a slight twist on it, we're also investors in the company. So we're doing the development of the spacecraft on investment money and getting equity in the company. So very interesting business case, as well as very interesting technology. And again, our forte, small satellites. So we're coming in at a few hundred kilograms to take a 2-ton existing satellite and keep it in place.
That's really amazing. I mean, the how to deal with debris versus older satellites, which eventually turn into debris, is an ongoing topic, I feel, over the last few years. And this modular model, I guess, to some extent, of adding a thruster for a few more years of life extension seems to be the easiest solution, at least for older satellites.
It's not an overall solution to this, but it does mitigate the problem a bit. And
it does push away the cost for a few more years.
It pushes away the cost, pushes away the debris for a few years. Yeah. But you're right to put them together, because this is just the first step of what we see in orbit servicing. And that's actually how we define the market. We don't define it as a life extension market, we define it as in-orbit servicing. Because once you've got a small spacecraft with robotic arms, you can start doing other stuff with it. So you can maybe do debris removal. By the way, that's one of the clear business cases. If a satellite has died in GEO, you can come up to it and grab it and take it away, because it's bothering everyone all the time. And maybe later on do that in low Earth orbit. So and maybe when people start going to the moon, in a few years' time, there's a gateway, a space station around the moon, and you have to bring things back and forth from spacecraft. Maybe you've got a small spacecraft now with arms that can come and take and bring, sort of like your neighborhood tender.
And it would also make it easier also to bring this sort of tech, which is not necessarily obsolete or completely dead, from orbit and bring it to the moon to build something new, possibly.
So lots of varieties and thoughts about what can happen in the future. But right now we're focused on a very clear, very good business case of life extension for geosatellites.
So we briefly touched on debris, and from a satellite's perspective, it must be quite a challenge to make sure that it doesn't bump into anything or get hit by anything. Can you please tell me a bit more about the challenge of physical harm? as well as the software challenge of a hack, for example, of another nation state.
So let's divide it into three. One is debris, and debris flies around at high speed, just like satellites fly around at high speed. And if you crash into them, well, these are two very flimsy bodies crashing in at high speed, and there's not going to be a good outcome to that if that happens. Luckily, the U.S. government and some others are coming in as well, are tracking tens of thousands of objects in space and routinely giving out warnings that we are coming close or will be coming close in a day or 2 days or 3 days to another object, usually debris, sometimes another satellite, and we maneuver out of the way. So it keeps us on our toes. We have our flight dynamic people ready and our satellite engineers ready, and whenever we get such an alert, we evaluate it. And if we
You
see
make it
there's
sound very
risk,
easy.
it's not difficult. It's nothing's easy about space. Space is very technical, very difficult, and no mistakes allowed because you can't fix it. So that's no more difficult than anything else. You just have to be on your toes and do it quickly. So that's a relatively easy one. The second part of that is, can things be attacked physically in space by other countries? Probably yes. The Chinese and the US have both demonstrated the ability to shoot down satellites. It's actually not shooting down, it's blowing them up in space. That's not a very nice thing to do because then you've got lots of debris. So it is seriously frowned upon in the space community. So we hope no one shoots us down, and not much to do against that one. And there's a lot of thought and talk about that in the space community. And the other thing you were asking for is cyber, and that is probably the easiest way to attack a space system, because doing that with a missile is very difficult. There are very few countries who can do that. And as I said, it's highly frowned upon because of the debris it creates. But hacking into a control system is easier to accomplish in that there are lots and lots of hackers out there. So we do invest significantly in protecting our control systems and our satellites from cyber threats.
Israel is pretty well known to be on the forefront when it comes to dealing with cyber threats.
We are.
You have a lot of startups and a lot of government agencies and a lot of companies that are purely focused on protecting against cyber threats from other countries or groups and so on. Do you work with any startups in that space, or are you developing entirely in-house?
We're investing significantly. I'll not go into exactly how we do our cyber protection. There may be some black hats out there listening, but we do invest significantly in making sure that we make life difficult for those who would want to hack, as does almost every other area of Israel's defense infrastructure.
That's good to hear. Opher, it was a pleasure to have you here today.
It was a pleasure talking. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for watching. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.